You pull out of the driveway and glance in the rearview mirror. There they are, still standing at the window, not waving anymore, just watching. You turn the corner, and the last thing you see is that silhouette, not moving, long after your car has disappeared. You've seen that image 100 times. Maybe you laughed it off on the way home. Maybe it hit you somewhere on the highway, 2 hours later, out of nowhere. Or maybe it's been following you for years, and you still can't quite explain why. Why do they do that? What are they actually feeling in those seconds when they watch you leave? Most people assume it's sadness. A few would say it's worry, but neither of those answers feels complete. Because what you saw in that window wasn't just emotion. It was something older than words, something that no one ever sat you down and explained, and science has started to put a name to it. This video is going to be a bit different from the rest, because we're not just talking about a feeling, we're talking about what actually happens to a parent's brain, specifically and measurably, the moment a child walks out the door. And I want you to know that understanding it doesn't have to be heavy. In many ways, knowing what's actually happening is the most comforting thing of all. So what is your parent actually feeling at that window? The answer is not what most people think. In 1949, a family psychologist named Gorelick identified the departure of a child from home as one of the 6 defining stages of a family's life cycle. By 1965, researchers had given it a formal name: empty nest syndrome. The term was used to describe the emotional response that parents experience when their role as active caregivers begins to dissolve. But here is what most people miss. They assume it is about missing you. And while that is part of it, the science reveals something far more specific and far more physical than simple longing. Ruth Feldman, a neuroscientist at Bar-Ilan University in Israel, has dedicated decades to studying the parental brain. In a landmark series of studies, culminating in a 2015 review published in Trends in Neurosciences, she demonstrated something extraordinary. Over years of caregiving, the parent's brain physically reorganizes itself around the child. The amygdala, the brain's emotional core, the reward circuits, the empathy networks, they don't just respond to the child, they are shaped by the child. Every moment of shared attention, every synchronized laugh, every time they said your name in a crowded room to find you, those interactions weren't just memories. They were construction. The parent's brain didn't just love you. It was literally restructured by you. It is worth pausing on that for a moment. We speak about love as though it were a feeling stored somewhere. But what Feldman's research established is that parental love is not only a feeling, it is a neural configuration. Studies using fMRI showed that when parents were exposed to the voice, the face, or even just a familiar scent associated with their own child, the amygdala, the ventral tegmental area, and the nucleus accumbens lit up with a specificity that no other stimulus could replicate. Not a partner, not a friend. Their child, specifically, activated those circuits with a precision that the brain reserves for its most foundational attachments. That activation doesn't require the child to be present. It requires only a cue that the child was ever there. What this means is something no greeting card has ever managed to say. When you leave, you are not just leaving a house. You are leaving the primary organizing experience of another person's brain. And their nervous system feels the gap before their words can describe it. And that shows up in behavior in 2 very distinct ways. Some parents go quiet after you leave. They return to an empty kitchen, sit down, and don't call for days. Others do the exact opposite. They call before you've even reached the freeway. They text about traffic, send articles about things you haven't needed to know in years, ask 3 times if you ate enough before you even reach the front door. Most people read the first as respect for your independence, and the second as difficulty letting go. But John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who spent decades studying human attachment, described something that makes both of those behaviors feel completely different. In his foundational trilogy Attachment and Loss, published between 1969 and 1980, Bowlby outlined what happens to any person when their primary attachment bond is threatened by separation. He described a predictable biological sequence: protest, then despair, then detachment. These weren't pathological responses. They were evolutionary ones, coded into the species long before any of us had a word for love. Protest means reaching out, calling, sending those articles. Despair means going quiet, retreating to the kitchen, sitting with the absence. Both are the brain processing the same rupture in proximity, not neediness, not coldness. The same underlying signal, expressed in 2 opposite directions. The parent at the window isn't choosing a reaction. They're having one that is centuries old, but there's a moment most adult children can recognize, something almost too small to analyze, until you start looking. Your parent asking one more time whether you remembered everything. The way they walked you to your car when they hadn't left the porch all morning. Or the way, even after weeks of knowing you were going to leave, they still looked surprised when you did. And then they stood there, not frozen, not dramatic, just standing, at the only point in the house where they could still see you, for as long as they possibly could. Researchers who study the transition to the empty nest have identified something called anticipatory grief, the process of mourning something before it is fully gone. A 2009 study by Barbara Mitchell and Lori Lovegreen at Simon Fraser University, published in the Journal of Family Issues, found that for many parents, particularly those who had made caregiving a central part of their identity, the sense of loss doesn't begin when the child finally moves out. It begins during every single goodbye before that, every visit that ends, every call that goes quiet, every time the house empties again registers in the parent's nervous system as a small rehearsal of something larger. They are not overreacting to the goodbye. They are accurately measuring something true about what that moment means. And here is where the science, once you look at it honestly, becomes impossible to dismiss. Feldman's research showed that parents and children, through years of physical proximity and daily interaction, develop what she called biobehavioral synchrony. Their heart rhythms align, their oxytocin levels, the neurochemical most associated with social bonding and trust, move in tandem. Their neural oscillations, the actual electrical rhythms of their brains, coordinate during moments of close interaction in ways that can be measured and mapped. This is not a metaphor. In a 2011 paper published in Neuropsychopharmacology, Feldman's team showed that this synchrony leaves a lasting structural signature in the parental brain. Not a memory, a reorganization. The parent who seems composed at the window and the parent who can't stop looking until the car is gone are both registering the same neurobiological event. The sudden withdrawal of the organism whose signals their own nervous system has been calibrated around, every day, for years. When you turn that corner, their brain notices before they do. There's something else worth understanding. The thing no one talks about on either side of that goodbye. The moment the car is out of sight, many parents walk back inside and don't know what to do with their hands. This is one of the most consistently reported experiences in empty nest research. It isn't metaphorical emptiness. It is the absence of the behavioral and neurological cues that structured their day. The house isn't just quieter. Something the brain was actively orienting itself around is no longer there to orient toward. If reading this brings up guilt, keep watching. Because this is the part that most adult children actually need to hear. There is a quiet, invisible weight that comes with leaving. Not only from the parent's side, but from the adult child who catches that image in the mirror and carries it for days without knowing why. Society frames departure as success, as independence, as the whole point of everything that came before it. And all of that is true. But the brain doesn't file it under one category. It files it under loss as well. Psychologists call what parents experience a form of disenfranchised grief, a grief that culture tends to dismiss because the child leaving is supposed to be good news. You raised them well enough to go. So the parent is left holding something the cultural script has no language for. I am proud of you, and I am undone by this. And both are happening at exactly the same time. Most parents never say this out loud. They call to say, drive safe. They text when you land. They ask when you're coming back. And they mean it as a small question, but it is a large one. Research published in the journal Psychological Reports found that empty nest parents, especially primary caregivers, showed measurable increases in depressive symptoms, a reduced sense of daily purpose, and elevated cortisol stress markers in the period following a child's departure. These changes weren't permanent, but they were real, and they were biological, not weakness, not failure to adapt. The nervous system registering the end of its most sustained caregiving relationship. Studies on empty nest grief consistently show that the vast majority of affected parents feel their loss is not taken seriously by those around them. Many report concealing how they are truly feeling, because the expectation, both from others and from themselves, is that they are supposed to be fine. Because there is no socially acceptable container for, my child is exactly where they should be and I am grieving, and I need both of those things to be allowed to exist at once. The brain, as researchers have consistently shown, does not distinguish between sanctioned and unsanctioned loss. It registers the absence of someone it was organized around, regardless of whether the circumstances are supposed to be joyful. So here's what the science actually says when you put all of it together. The parent at the window is not watching out of worry alone, though worry is part of it. They are not watching because they cannot let go, though that pull is real. What they are doing, what that stillness actually is the last act of a brain that spent years building itself around your presence. The window is where proximity ends. They are standing at the exact point where they can still see you. Because the moment you disappear, something in the neural architecture their brain constructed for you goes quiet, and there is no gradual transition to that. There is only the moment before and the moment after. That is not poetry. That is what the neuroimaging shows, and everything you gave them, the chaos of growing up inside their house, the arguments and the ordinary evenings, the way you walked through their door without knocking because it had never once occurred to you that you needed permission. All of it built something that neuroscience would classify as one of the most formative organizing experiences a human brain undergoes. Not because every day was tender, but because the weight of it, across all those years, was the most significant thing their brain ever structured itself around. You gave them that. If you're still carrying the image of someone standing in a window, understand this. That stillness was not a burden they placed on you. It was the most honest thing they knew how to show you. And if they never said what it meant, it is because there is no sentence in any language that holds all of it. It is the biologically accurate, proportional weight of having been the thing that someone's entire world was built to protect. That is not sentiment. That is data. And that is worth knowing. If this video reached you at the right time, or helped you understand something you've been carrying for a while, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.